All right, let's dive into communication skills. I mean, it's something we use every single day, right? But how often do we actually stop and think about how we could be better at it? Especially now when we're juggling like virtual meetings and emails and all those quick texts, there's so much to navigate. You shared a really interesting article with me. It's from BetterUp, that professional coaching platform.
Hmm.
And the title really caught my eye. It's called 18 Effective Strategies to Improve Your Communication Skills.
Nice.
It was published pretty recently, too, on September 25th, 2024.
Oh, wow. So it's pretty fresh.
Yeah, so it's fresh and ready for our deep dive.
Perfect. And it's a good one. I think what makes this article really stand out is that it goes beyond just speaking clearly. It looks at things like active listening and body language, even how to change up your style depending on the situation.
Okay, so it's not just what you say, but how you say it.
Ex
I like it. So the article kicks off by outlining 5 different types of communication: oral, written, nonverbal, active listening, and then this one that kind of threw me, contextual communication.
Right.
What is that exactly?
Oh, contextual communication is really interesting. It's all about understanding, like, the unspoken dynamics in a certain environment. Like, think about how you communicate differently if you're just brainstorming with your team versus giving a formal presentation to, like, the CEO. Same message, right? But your delivery, your tone, even the specific words you use might totally change.
So it's kind of like reading the room, but on a much deeper level, being aware of power dynamics and relationships and adjusting your communication to fit.
Exactly.
I can already see how that would be so valuable at work, especially with so many teams working remotely these days.
Oh, absolutely. And the article actually gives some really practical tips for mastering all 5 of these communication styles.
Oh, that's awesome.
One that I thought was really important was the focus on being concise and engaging, keeping things short and sweet. There's this great line in there, don't use 10 words when one will do.
I love that. It's a good reminder for all of us who, tend to over-explain or get lost in the details.
It's so true.
But why is being concise so important? Like, beyond just saving time, what's the real impact?
Well, think about it. When someone just keeps rambling on, doesn't your mind start to wander?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Our attention spans are so short, especially these days. So being concise shows respect for the other person's time. And it helps to make sure your message actually gets through.
It's about clarity and impact, right? You're not just throwing words at people, you're choosing them carefully to make the most impact.
Exactly.
Speaking of impact, the article seems to be a big fan of face-to-face communication whenever possible, especially for those really important messages.
Yeah.
Why is that so crucial?
Well, remember all those nonverbal cues we were talking about? Facial expressions, body language, tone of voice, all those things add layers of meaning that just get lost in written communication.
That's true.
In fact, there's research that shows that a huge amount of our communication is actually nonverbal. So when you really need to get something across, being face-to-face lets you use all those cues to strengthen your message and build that connection.
It makes sense. There's a certain energy, a certain connection that just happens when you're face-to-face. You pick up on those subtle cues, and you can adjust how you're communicating in real time, which you can't do in an email or text.
Right, exactly.
Now, I'm curious about their take on active listening. They really seem to emphasize that as a core skill.
Yeah, they do.
What makes active listening so tough?
I think the biggest challenge for most people is we're so focused on planning what we're going to say next, coming up with our own response, that we don't really hear what the other person's actually saying.
Oh, I'm totally guilty of that sometimes.
Yeah, me too. It's easy to do.
My mind starts racing ahead, thinking about what I want to say next, and I miss half of what they're actually trying to communicate.
It happens to the best of us.
So how do we overcome that? What are some tips for becoming better active listeners?
The article suggests this really interesting mindset shift. Like, instead of focusing on what you're going to say next, you try to focus on helping the speaker refine what they're thinking.
So it's less about showing off how smart you are, more about being a sounding board, helping them make their ideas clearer.
Exactly. And they give some concrete ways to do that. One is like paraphrasing what you've heard, but without adding your own opinions.
Yeah, so it's okay, so what I'm hearing is, and then summarizing their points in your own words.
Yeah, and they even say you should try to use some of the speaker's own, sticky language, those words or phrases that really stand out. It shows you're really paying attention.
I can see how that would make someone feel like you're really on the same page.
Exactly. It's a really subtle but powerful way to build rapport.
What about asking questions? Is that part of active listening too?
Oh, absolutely, but not just any questions. The article talks about asking questions that help the speaker really think more deeply about their own ideas.
Okay.
It might play devil's advocate a little or gently point out things that don't quite add up or ask for clarification when something's vague.
So it's more than just nodding along. You're really engaging with what we're saying, helping them dig deeper.
Exactly.
Okay, so this one might sound a little strange, but the article also mentions, get this, polite interruption.
Yeah.
I know, it sounds kind of rude, right?
I know, right?
But they do make a good point. Sometimes people can get sidetracked or get lost in the details, and a well-placed interruption can actually help them stay focused and get to the, heart of the matter. Okay, I'm intrigued but also terrified. How do you interrupt someone politely without derailing the whole conversation? Or seeming disrespectful?
It's all in how you do it. First of all, you have to acknowledge their point before you jump in. Something like, that's a really great point, or I appreciate you bringing that up, however.
So you're acknowledging their contribution, but also signaling you've got something to add.
Right. And your tone is super important, too. It has to be, warm and respectful and focused on the overall goal of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You could say something like, I want to make sure we hear from everyone on this topic, so could I jump in with a quick question?
That's a great example. You're making it about the group, not just about you.
Right.
Before we move on from active listening, I want to go back to something that really struck me in the article. They talk about how the goal of active listening is to help the speaker refine their thinking. What do they mean by that?
It's a really fascinating concept, isn't it? It's like active listening isn't just about taking in information. It's about really engaging with the speaker's ideas and helping them get to a deeper level of understanding.
So it's almost like you're helping them shape and polish their thoughts, like you're working together to bring their ideas into focus.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. The article actually gives specific techniques for doing this.
Okay.
For example, you might reflect back the speaker's emotions to show you understand how they're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
You could summarize their key points to help them see the big picture.
Yeah.
Or you could ask open-ended questions to encourage them to consider different angles or potential problems.
So you're helping them connect the dots in their own thinking, maybe even see things they hadn't considered before?
Exactly. And by doing that, you're not just listening, you're actively contributing to their thought process.
It's a really powerful way to build trust and create a truly collaborative environment.
Absolutely.
Now, I know we've spent a lot of time talking about active listening, which is obviously super important,
Yeah.
but I want to hear more about what the article says about, effective communication overall. What other insights stood out to you?
One thing that really struck me, and it's not a separate section or anything, but it's kind of woven throughout the whole article, is this idea of empathy.
Oh, yeah, I noticed that too. Like when I'm talking about tailoring your message to the audience or paying attention to those nonverbal cues or asking those thought-provoking questions.
Right.
It all comes back to empathy, understanding the other person's point of view.
It really does. It's like they're saying good communication isn't just about getting your point across clearly. It's about building relationships and trust and really understanding each other.
Yeah.
And empathy is at the heart of that.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that the person you're talking to, they have their own experiences and perspectives and emotions. And when you take the time to really understand and acknowledge those things, you create a much stronger connection,
Yeah.
which leads to better communication overall.
Exactly.
It's funny, we haven't even touched on the challenges of online communication, which is how we do so much of our interacting these days.
Oh, that's a great point. And that's where empathy becomes even more important because we're missing all those nonverbal cues that we rely on so much when we're face-to-face.
Exactly. It's so easy to misinterpret tone in an email or a text, and things can get out of hand so quickly if you're not careful.
The article really stresses being extra mindful online.
Yeah.
Things like choosing your words carefully, maybe using emojis to convey tone, and just being really proactive about clarifying things that could be misunderstood.
It's almost like you have to overcompensate for the lack of those nonverbal cues.
Right.
And sometimes a quick phone call or video chat can clear up a misunderstanding so much faster than a whole chain of emails.
Totally agree. It's about recognizing the limitations of the medium and finding ways to bridge that gap.
Well, I feel like we've covered a lot today, from the different types of communication to the power of active listening and the importance of empathy.
We have.
It's clear that becoming a better communicator is a journey, not a destination.
It is, and the best part is there's always room for improvement.
Yeah.
Even small changes in how we communicate can make a big difference in our relationships and how successful we are.
So true. As we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
I think the key takeaway is that effective communication is a skill. It's something you can learn and get better at.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about being a naturally gifted speaker or writer. It's about being intentional and mindful and empathetic.
And don't forget about practicing those active listening techniques. I'm personally going to work on my polite interruption skills. Who knows? Maybe I'll even become a master of asking thought-provoking questions.
I have no doubt you will. And for our listeners, I encourage you to pick just one of the tips we talked about today and try it out in your next conversation. You might be surprised by the difference it makes.
That's a great challenge. Even a small change in how you communicate can have a ripple effect on your relationships, your work, and your overall well-being.
Absolutely.
So go forth and communicate with confidence, empathy, and maybe even a well-timed, polite interruption or two.
That's right.
Until next time, happy communicating.